there's some important information that will come out on the Aadhar card. Remember, the Supreme Court verdict on the use of the Aadhar card will be heard today. Will the Aadhar card be used for services such as the opening of the bank account or applying for telephone connections? That's something that we were expecting to hear, but as of now, we don't have any flashes on your screen. We're just awaiting more details on that. Menka is here with us.
Some background to this. On August 11th this year, Sonia, the Supreme Court, when hearing several petitions opposing the mandatory use of Aadhaar, said very simply that because there are privacy issues involved in this and the security of data issues, two very important concerns, they referred this to a constitutional bench and passed an interim order saying the government must make it sure and publicize it that Aadhaar is not mandatory for all citizens, that citizens can obtain of benefits without even Aadhaar. So they could voluntarily apply for Aadhaar. They could, if they chose to, use Aadhaar when they want to obtain benefits like subsidies, etc. But they don't have to show Aadhaar, so it's not mandatory. The Supreme Court also circumscribed the use of Aadhaar to only three services: PDS, which is the food distribution system, LPG and kerosene distribution. And now the government and 5 other regulators have asked the Supreme Court to amend its interim order and see if the scope of Aadhaar, voluntary use of Aadhaar, can be widened to other services. So that's what was being argued in court today, and that's what we are trying to see. And I think they've got no interim relief based on the news that we're getting in. No interim relief for government and regulators from the Supreme Court on the application of Aadhaar, which in very simple terms, pending more details, would mean that as of now, the use of Aadhaar can only be applied to the food distribution system, which is the PDS, and the LPG and kerosene subsidies. So no other it cannot be used for anything else. And even in these, it can only be used voluntarily, from what I understand. It cannot be mandatory. So you cannot deny a citizen a benefit that he or she is entitled to as a resident of the country if he or she does not have Aadhaar. That was what the Supreme Court said on August 11th, and the news seems to indicate that stands as of now. Well, we have Mr. Harish Salve joining us now. Mr. Salve, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. It does seem that the government and the 5 regulators that had asked for the scope of the voluntary use of Aadhaar to be expanded have not found any positive decision from the Supreme Court today. What would your comment be on this?
You know, my views on this are very clear. I think the government has put everybody in a bit of a spot by raising the issue of whether there is a right to privacy and getting it stuck in the larger constitutional question. This is an open and shut case, which, if it was argued on the premise that even if there is a right to privacy, there is no violation by collecting the basic data relating to private human beings. And if the unnecessary cloud sought to be created on the security aspect had been removed by the government effectively, I don't think the case would have really sort of taken this kind of turn. But anyway, we are where we are.
Mr. Salve, just to sort of stick with the current issues before I talk to you about the privacy matter, it will now be referred to a larger bench, from which I understand will be the constitutional bench, which is yet to be set up, from what I understand.
No. The first issue to be decided is there a right to privacy? Now, that's the larger issue to be gone into, which, is a metaphysical constitutional issue.
Metaphysical constitutional issue, sir?
Yeah, and according to me, it's a non-issue because, frankly, in 2015 to say your right to personal liberty doesn't include the right to privacy is a complete constitutional anachronism. But anyway, that's where we are.
Unfortunately, Mr. Salve, it does seem those who oppose the mandatory use of Aadhaar without sufficient privacy and security safeguards are concerned about the lack of an explicit right to privacy in the Constitution or any overarching privacy law. So what's the way out of this?
There are so many rights which the Supreme Court has read into the Constitution. The right to privacy is one of them. I don't think the fact that there is no express right gives rise to any concern in any person superficially familiar with constitutional law. I have appeared in this case for the Delhi government, and I personally would think it's a charitable use of language to call the challenge a nonsense. But anyway, that's where we are.
But Mr. Salve,
if once you go into the details of how the data is collected and how the data is maintained, I don't think there is any reason to suspect that there will be some sort of a looming big brother who is watching everywhere you go and checking at everything you do and stuff like that.
Okay, so so the point you're making is that there ought not to be any privacy or security concerns because the safeguards are all in place, according to you.
Today, Manika, you want to run a TV channel. Today, you want to be an anchor on a TV channel. Don't you have to give all your particulars?
Yes.
If I want a driving license, if I want a passport, somebody wants money from the government, somebody wants benefit from the government, he's asked to give all his particulars. And the government says, if you want to go and live in the forest and want nothing to do with civil society, so be it, go away.
No, so I don't think the argument here, sir, is against Aadhaar. I think the question simply was, do we have enough safeguards in place to ensure that our biometric data, which is retinal scans and fingerprints, are secure with the government and not with private agencies? So that's the question.
1 minute. All the people who need to worry about biometric data being stolen are those people who have assets which can be stolen, correct? One is the abstract right to privacy. I don't know how your privacy is stolen by somebody knowing what your fingerprint looks like.
I think the fear, and I'm not arguing this, I'm just referring to the arguments made in court.
I'm telling
you. The fear is about, for instance, this information being used in criminal investigations.
See, constitutional law is never fossilized. Constitutional law evolves. The right to privacy is a notion which has evolved. 50 years back, 70 years back, nobody thought right to privacy was a constitutional right. Today it is axiomatic to say that privacy is a constitutional right. In the same way, when you say in today's world, right to privacy in a time where there are satellites, in the time where all of us want access to electronic media, to all the stuff we use, to social media, where in any case you are completely exposed. And to say that the poorest of the poor, their right to privacy is in some way jeopardized if somebody gets to know what their fingerprints look like. What are you going to do with those fingerprints? And if you use those fingerprints to commit a crime, well, that's a matter which can happen in any case. So, secondly, what is the degree of safeguard which is available in the system? The safeguard is enormous. Today, people, lower middle class people who have bank accounts, all their biometrics are available with the bank. That system can be hacked. What about their right to privacy? So I mean, my ultimate invasion of privacy is by the income tax department who wants to know how much I earn on a day-to-day basis.
I won't veer off into tax here, but I think some of those concerns made validly, in fact, by the counsel, Sham Diwan, were also heightened by the fact that Mr. Mukul Rohatgi said that the right to privacy is not an explicit one. So I think there is some worry
here.
Not
being not an explicit right is a non-issue. If there is a right to privacy, please take privacy. When I appeared for the Gujarat government on the last occasion, I told the court, please assume that state of Gujarat has privacy at its highest. How is it being violated? If somebody is told, if you want subsidy from the government, we need your biometrics to make sure you're the right guy.
Mr. Salve, I'm sure you would acknowledge that there are concerns, and whether the government has done a good job of addressing those concerns adequately or not.
I have not heard a concern of any real, genuine merit. I repeat, if there is somebody who wants to live in the forest, he is welcome to live in the forest. Somebody who wants to live outside the system is welcome. The Aadhaar card is not mandatory. We are not saying all citizens must queue up and give their print. What we are saying is if you are going to have interaction with the government is collecting your biometric data so that interaction is facilitated and leakage is prevented. That's a larger social good.
And yet, sir, the Supreme Court's not fully convinced by that argument, hence has referred it to a constitutional bench.
Because a larger issue came up. See, last time when it was being argued, a very dark picture of what can be happened was painted. Now the court had to be shown the other side of the picture as to what are the checks and safeguards. The second time when the case was argued, instead of getting into the checks and safeguards and what exactly the Aadhaar card is all about, a huge constitutional issue was raised as to whether do we at all have a right to privacy. Now that unsettled the whole situation. So the court says, all right, we'll consider the larger question on whether we have a right to privacy.
Okay, but for the immediate impact, sir, from what we can understand as of now...
Immediate impact is disaster.
Well,
disaster. I'm sorry.
I'm sure there are many on the other side who may not agree with you, but I won't prolong that debate. As of now, it can only be used for food.
When SEBI came there and said, we want people to have an Aadhaar card to work our accounts, they said, sorry, no, you can't have it.
Well, so I'm not going to continue the debate here. Firstly, because I know it's very difficult to win against Harish Salve, and secondly, because we are at the moment focused on the immediate impact of this. The regulators and the government have not got any additional relief, so I understand this will now be. Yeah, this will now be decided by the Constitution bench, and that is an indefinite period of time because the bench in itself has yet to be constituted, right, sir?
Absolutely. You are now in a indefinite, and you know the problem is when it goes before the Constitution bench, first will be the larger issue of whether there is a right to privacy. What are its nuances? And then will come the lesser issue, as it were, of Aadhaar. Although, according to me, the immediate and the more crying need is to decide about the Aadhaar card, and you know, the nuances of privacy right can be gone into later. But anyway, that's how life is.
All right, Mr. Salve, we'll leave it there as always. Lovely to have you on the show. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Harish Salve very eloquently making the argument for why there ought not to be security and privacy issues. But I can tell you I've heard counsel on the other side as well, and there are serious concerns there as well. So now the matter goes to a constitutional bench. The constitution of that bench has yet to be decided, and we were expecting that announcement this afternoon. And we will now know only over the next few weeks, months, or maybe even a year, on what the situation is with regards to the right to privacy and therefore the mandatory or non-mandatory use of Aadhaar.
So the security and privacy issues, of course, are the larger issue at hand. But for now, you can't use the Aadhaar. The Aadhaar card is applicable only for PDS and for LPG,
and kerosene. That's it. Those are the only three things that the Supreme Court had circumscribed the use of Aadhaar to in its August 11 judgment. The regulators and the government wanted the use of Aadhaar, the scope of the use of Aadhaar, to be widened to other services. As Mr. Salve pointed out, SEBI wanted it, available for financial services, etc. Banks wanted it, RBI wanted it available for financial services as well. And they don't seem to have found that relief in the Supreme Court, at least based on the news that we're getting as of now. One will have to see the written order, if there is a written order out later this evening, to see if there's any nuance in that ought to be considered. But as of now, that's the news we're getting.
All right, Menka, thanks a lot for that. So that's the latest update on the Aadhaar issue. We'll take a break on